Hi, Ben Johnson here to record this week's High Tech Friday. This week we take a look at 14 things that everyone should know about Excel, which, by the way, most will work in a Google spreadsheet as well. So on the screen in front of me, I have the list. We'll try to tackle the first half or so in this video and then the second half in another video. So go ahead and open up Excel and try to open up a spreadsheet that has some data. And I'll just start with this one that I have in front of me. And I'll just go through some of the typical things that I do with a new spreadsheet. To begin with, typically I'll get spreadsheets where the columns are not wide enough to fit the data. And so the quick way to fix that is to click on the triangle here, which will select the entire spreadsheet. And then you can simply pick any two columns like A and B. Wait until you get the two-headed arrow and then double click. And all of the columns will automatically expand to fit the contents of the cell. If you ever see these pound signs, that means there's a number there. Excel has intentionally turned them into pound symbols so that people don't accidentally interpret part of a number. And so if they print, they would look like that too. And so that's just a handy way to fix that problem. The next thing that I'll usually do is click in cell B2 so that I can freeze the panes around that. If I scroll down, you'll see I lose my headings. If I scroll to the right, you'll see I lose my headings. And so if I click on B2 and I go to View, Freeze Panes, when I scroll down, I keep my first row. And when I scroll to the right, I keep my first column. Now, if you wanted to keep first and last name, you could click C2 and repeat that strategy, and that would keep the first two columns on. So those are two things I'll typically do on a new spreadsheet. The next thing that I'll do is usually sort my data in a more usable format. And so to sort, you'll just go back to your home menu and you'll go to form. If I want my, say, oldest movies, I'll go to year, sort, A to Z. Now I've got my old movies. Maybe I want my 5-star movies. So I'll do sort Z to A. If I want to look at more than one column at a time, I can come up here to my sort filter and I'll do a custom sort. And this is where you would check something like category, sort A to Z, and then within category I can add another level, and I could do by rating, Z to A, and then I'll hit OK. So you can see that it's sorted by category, but then within the categories you can see that I have my 5-star movies at the top. So sorting by more than one column at a time is possible. You just have to go to the custom sort. Just want to point out that should your headings ever get sorted within the data, just make sure that you check this box that says my data has headers, and that will prevent them from getting sorted within the data set. Next, if I have a large data set, I like to turn on filtering. And so to do the filtering, I need to just go ahead and click on Sort Filter, and that will put the triangles onto the tops of the headings, and then you can just simply click Select All, which will uncheck them, and then I can click Drama, and then I can go to Rating, unselect them, and then click on, say, 5-star, and now I'll just be looking at my 5-star dramas. The blue numbers here on the left-hand side is Excel's way to remind you that some of the data has been hidden. And so to unhide the data, you simply just go to go back to your home menu and then go to clear, and that will unhide your data. So that's how you sort and filter. Next, a lot of times when you get a new spreadsheet, you'll notice that first and last name are together. And so that's an easy fix. You just have to figure out what character separates them. It's typically a comma, but in this case, it's a space. So I just need to find the name with the most spaces, like Robert Downey Jr. It has 2 spaces, and that means I need to add 2 columns, and I can just insert those. And now I'll have a space for Robert Downey Jr. And so now I can go ahead and separate them out. So I highlight column C, I go to Data, Text to Columns, delimited because it's with a space, fixed width would be for like phone numbers, social security numbers. I'll hit Next. I'll make sure to check space here. I do use other frequently with things like an @ symbol to separate email prefixes, but in this case I just need a space. So then I'll hit Next and then Finish. Warns us that it's going to replace whatever data is in those columns. We added the blank columns, we don't need to worry about that. We just hit OK. And now all you need to do is just take a few minutes and clean up any of the mistakes that were left. And then you can just simply delete the leftovers. Alright, now that was called text to columns, and you could go ahead and redo your headings. Now occasionally you'll need to put things back together. We can do that with a function called concatenate, or we can just use the and symbol. So to do that, we just start by typing a formula, equals, and then we'd click first name and last name, and that it would show Errol Flynn without a space. Now I'll show you in a minute how to autofill that, but some people are wondering about the space, so how could we put a space in there? Well, it's real easy. You just come up here and behind this and symbol, you would just type a space. The problem with the space is that it's text, and Excel doesn't deal with text very well unless you tell it that it's text. And so we type a quote and then type a space and then another quote and then another and sign, so we end up with C2 and quote, space, quote, and D2. And the quotes are just telling Excel that, hey, that's text. Don't try to do any operation to it mathematically. And then we end up with Errol Flynn, and we can autofill that down now simply by putting our mouse cursor over the autofill handle and double clicking, and that's going to fill in all of the names with the autofill. Now while I'm talking about autofill, I'd just like to mention over here, maybe in column T, I can use autofill for other things like laying out a series of numbers, so I can just type 1, 2 to establish the pattern. Then I can use my mouse to highlight those. Then I can use this autofill handle and just drag that down to autofill in numbers. So this is a big time saver. You can do it if you want to repeat numbers like 1, 2, 1, 2. The way you do that is highlight 1, 2, mouse over it, you get the little solid plus. Hold down the control on your keyboard, you'll see a second plus, and now I can drag down, and that's going to simply repeat 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can use autofill on things like dates. Days of the week. Months of the year. Anytime Excel recognizes any sort of a pattern. And you can make your own custom autofill lists if you'd like to. One other strategy I'd like to show is that if you needed to skip weekends, like you're making a teacher duty roster or something, I'll change this to a long date format. So I'll go home, date, long date. Maybe I want to skip weekends, so I can just type that first date, highlight to where I want my dates to go, and then I can go to this fill series weekday. And you'll see the pound symbols because they don't fit. So again, I can double click between Y and Z. And now I've got my dates skipping weekends. So that's a handy feature also. All right, next I wanted to talk about conditional formatting. That's going to help you see visually when numbers are high, low, or medium. And so I can highlight these years, pretend like they're test scores maybe. I can go back to my home tab and go to conditional formatting. I can go to color scales, and I can do this green for good, red for bad, and that's going to quickly highlight my high scores, my low scores, scores in the middle. If I'd like to use icons to help with that, I can go to conditional formatting. I can choose icon sets, and that's going to visually show me which students have scored well, medium, or poor. That's all done within the conditional formatting, just a useful way to visually see what's going on quickly without having to study the numbers individually. Alright, last thing I think in this tutorial is what's called pivot tables. Pivot tables allow you to make sense of a large data set by summarizing it for you automatically without having to write any formulas. Really powerful. If you used Excel only for pivot tables, it would be worth learning how to use it for that purpose. So to do a pivot table, you always want to click in A1, which will help Excel know where your data set is, and then you go to Insert Pivot Table. Should guess correctly. As long as it does, you can just go ahead and hit OK. If it didn't, you would use your mouse and highlight the correct data set. It makes a new sheet. This is usually where people get lost. Here are the headings, and you just have to decide which headings are most important, like category, and you drag that to rows, and it will summarize all the categories. If you want to go more than one layer deep, I'll show you that in a second. But then whatever you want to typically add or count, you put in values like price. It's going to give us a total of the value of movies within those categories. Now, maybe you just want to count the movies within those categories, so instead of sum, you would right click and you would say summarize values by count. Now I know which categories have the most movies. I could write a formula to do that, but it would take a lot of work. Okay, now if I want to have some subcategories in here, I can go ahead and drag something like rating below category, and now it's going to give me a total of each category plus the subtotal for the different ratings within there. Now if you're wondering why it's called a pivot table, that's because you can drag these headings into columns, for example, and that makes a different sort of table, and that's where they get the name pivot table. And it just requires a little playing around. Further, you can filter things by putting maybe a year up here. But that's a pivot table, and then you can easily make pivot charts with out of your pivot tables. And so you can see here I've got a nice pivot chart to go with this pivot table, and they just say picture is worth 1,000 words, and so you can quickly see here that that's true, because you can see, for one thing, the dramas have a lot more movies and a lot more 5-star movies than, say, the mystery collection. So that's how you do a pivot table and a pivot chart. Super useful, and you can also make these in a Google spreadsheet. So nearly everything I showed here today will also work in a Google spreadsheet. You just get to it in a slightly different place. If you want to drill down on any of these things, you can just double click. It will make a new spreadsheet with just that record. Okay. And so you can see there it made sheet 2 with just those records, so it's a nice way to drill down on your data. Alright, in next week's screencast I'll show you the 6 remaining features in Excel that I think everyone ought to know. Thanks for watching this week's High Tech Friday.